A lone woman kneels by the river, her trembling hands clasped in desperate prayer. Around her, the vast Arizona territory stretches indifferently, red canyon walls rising like barriers to heaven itself, cast aside by her own people after her. Husband's death. Elizabeth Colter has nowhere left to turn. The settlers have labeled her burdensome, unworthy of precious resources in this harsh land. What they cannot see are the strength in her weathered hands and the fierce will behind her. Tears. Upstream, hidden among ancient cottonwoods, Nóġį watches. The Apache scout recognizes something in her sorrow that echoes his own losses. Could the ancient wisdom of his people heal what has been broken in both their worlds? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Elizabeth's fingers reached for the tarnished silver locket hanging from her neck, the last remnant of a life now buried. Inside, a faded daguerreotype of Thomas stared back at her, his stern frontier face frozen in time. 3 months since the fever took him, 3 months of whispers behind her back. A woman alone is a burden, her brother-in-law Jacob had declared. Last week, standing in what had been her home for 5 years. The community has decided. What he meant was that he had decided. Jacob Colter, who had always resented his younger brother's marriage, who had always looked at Elizabeth like she was something less than human, like she was taking up space that wasn't rightfully hers. The Bible teaches charity, Elizabeth had whispered, fingers tracing the worn leather cover of the family Bible where the Colter lineage was recorded, her name now crossed out with thick black ink. The Bible teaches that you reap what you sow, Jacob replied, his voice flat as the Kansas plains he'd left behind, and you've sown nothing but trouble since Thomas brought you here. She'd taken little, some clothes, Thomas's hunting knife, a small sack of cornmeal, and the family Bible Jacob had thrown at her feet. Take it, he'd sneered. Your name's been removed anyway. 3 days she'd wandered before finding the river, 3 days of parched lips and dizzying hunger before the water's blessed music reached her ears. She'd made camp beneath an overhang of red rock, fashioning a crude shelter from branches and the single blanket she'd carried away. Each morning, she awoke to the same crushing realization. She was utterly alone. The nearest proper settlement was Fort Hastings, 20 miles east. A woman traveling alone might as well hang a sign inviting trouble. The small trading post 5 miles north was little better, frequented by men who saw a solitary woman as fair game. Elizabeth splashed cold river water on her face, watching ripples distort her reflection. At 32, her once smooth features had weathered into something harder, like the landscape around her. The golden hair Thomas had so admired now hung in limp, sun-bleached strands. Her hands, once soft from Eastern living, had grown calloused from frontier life. You'll adapt, Thomas had promised when he'd first brought her west from Pennsylvania. This land shapes you, forces out your true nature. She hadn't understood then. Now, watching the river carve patiently through stone, she began to. The cornmeal was nearly gone. She'd tried fishing with a makeshift line, but caught nothing. The few edible plants she recognized weren't yet in season. Her stomach had stopped growling days ago, settling into a hollow ache that seemed to reach her very soul. Elizabeth clutched the locket tighter. "What would you have me do, Thomas?" she whispered. The metal warmed in her palm, but offered no answers. From his vantage point in the cottonwood grove, Nóġì observed the white woman's routine. 4 days now she had remained by the river, growing visibly weaker. Her movements reminded him of a wounded deer, deliberate, conserving strength, aware of vulnerability. He had first noticed the smoke from her small fire. Investigating as his scout duties required, he'd expected the usual. Prospectors, soldiers, or settlers passing through. Finding a woman alone had been surprising. That she remained alive after 4 days alone was even more so. Most white women he'd encountered would have fled screaming at the first rustle in the brush, the first shadow. That didn't belong. This one showed a different quality. She moved with purpose despite her weakening state. When a rattlesnake had slithered near her camp yesterday, she had calmly, slowly backed away, then used a long branch to guide it elsewhere. Respect. That was what he felt watching her now as she knelt by the water, one hand clutching something at her neck, lips moving in what he recognized as prayer. His people had different words, different gestures, but he recognized the universal language of someone pleading with forces beyond their control. Soon, she would be too weak to help herself. The decision before him was simple yet impossibly complex. Nóġì twisted the eagle feather between his fingers, feeling its spine, strong yet flexible. The old medicine man had given it to him 7 winters ago when he first became a scout. Eagles see truth from above, the elder had told him. They carry no hatred, only clear vision. Truth was what Nóġì sought now, watching the white woman struggle for survival. His people and hers were enemies. This was the simple truth that should guide him. But there were older truths his grandfather had taught him. Truths about the oneness of suffering, about seeing beyond the skin to the spirit within. He who listens was the name given to him at his coming-of-age ceremony. Not just a listener to sounds, any warrior could do that, but a listener to the deeper currents, the whispers of wind, the messages in animal movements, the silent cries of those in need. And this woman's silence screamed louder than any war cry he had ever heard. The tribal council would disapprove. White eyes bring only death, his cousin had warned just last month, after settlers had poisoned a waterhole used by their band. 3 children had died. The bitterness ran deep, the wounds still fresh, yet Nóġì occupied an unusual position among his people. As a scout who sometimes worked with the blue-coat soldiers at Fort Hastings, he walked between worlds, trusted fully by neither. His knowledge of the white man's tongue and ways made him valuable to his tribe, but also suspect. His wife and son had died of the white man's spotted sickness 2 winters past. Many expected him to become bitter, to join the young warriors who favored war over the elders' path of cautious coexistence. Instead, grief had hollowed him out, leaving a space where hatred should have grown. Nóġì tucked the eagle feather into his hair, feeling its weight against his temple. The woman below had wrapped herself in her blanket despite the afternoon. Heat, a bad sign. Her movements were becoming sluggish, her periods of rest longer. He thought of the soldiers who sometimes followed him with narrowed eyes, hands never far from their weapons. The only good Apache is a dead Apache, he had overheard one say. The young lieutenant had apologized, but Nóġì knew the sentiment ran deep. This woman might harbor the same thoughts, or she might scream at the sight of him, draw the knife he had seen her carry. The risk was substantial. Still, something about her reminded him of his grandmother in her final days, dignity preserved despite circumstances. A quiet determination to face what comes with grace. The sun would set soon. The desert nights were cold, especially for one growing weaker by the hour. He had medicine in his pouch, herbs that could strengthen her, restore balance to her struggling body. His grandmother had been a healer, and she had taught him well before joining the ancestors. Nóġì made his decision as an eagle circled overhead, its cry piercing the late afternoon silence. A sign, perhaps, or merely a bird hunting. Either way, he would heed it. He gathered the small medicine pouch from his camp, adding extra herbs and checking that his water skin was full. Moving silently through the cottonwoods, he circled to approach. From downstream, less threatening than appearing suddenly from the rocks above, the woman had not moved for nearly an hour. Her back rested against a boulder, face tilted upward, as if searching the cloudless sky for answers. As Nóġì drew closer, moving deliberately to make some sound and avoid startling her, he could see her lips moving in prayer, or perhaps delirium, one step into the open, then another. 20 paces separated them when her eyes fluttered open, focusing slowly on his approaching figure. Her body tensed, hand reaching instinctively for the knife at her waist but lacking the strength to grasp it properly. Nóġį stopped, raised his empty hands and waited. The moment stretched between them like the vast Arizona sky, filled with possibility and danger in equal measure. Elizabeth's heart hammered against her ribs. An Apache, here, now, when she was too weak to run, too weak to fight. The stories. Other settlers told around campfires rushed back, scalping, torture, women taken captive. Yet the man before her made no threatening move. He simply stood, hands open, waiting. "If you're going to kill me," she managed, voice cracking from disuse and thirst, "be quick about it." The Apache tilted his head slightly, as if considering her words. Then, slowly, he reached for something at his waist. Elizabeth tensed, but instead of a weapon, he produced a small leather pouch and a water skin. He took one step forward, then another. Elizabeth pressed herself against the boulder at her back, nowhere to retreat. When he was 5 paces away, he crouched down, placing the water skin on the ground between them, then retreated 2 steps. The gesture was unmistakable, an offering. Thirst overrode fear. Elizabeth reached for the water skin with trembling hands, uncapped it, and drank. The water tasted different. Herbs, perhaps, but was cool and blessed on her parched throat. "Thank you," she whispered after drinking her fill. The Apache nodded once. "Sick," he said in heavily accented English, gesturing to her. From the leather pouch, he produced several dried plants. Medicine. Elizabeth hesitated. The knife at her waist suddenly seemed very small, very inadequate against this man who moved like a shadow. Yet if he meant harm, why offer water? Why speak of medicine? "Why help me?" she asked. He touched his ear, then his chest. "I listen." As if that explained everything. When she made no move to take the herbs, he demonstrated, placing one in his own mouth and chewing slowly before swallowing. He offered another to her. Elizabeth's education in Boston had included some rudimentary botany. The plant looked like sage or something similar, nothing obviously poisonous. And if he meant to kill her, the water would have been simpler. She accepted the herb, placing it cautiously in her mouth, bitter at first, then oddly soothing. "Name?" he asked, pointing to himself. "Nóġì." He repeated it slowly, emphasizing each syllable. "Nóġì," she attempted, the unfamiliar sounds awkward on her tongue. He nodded, seeming pleased, then pointed at her questioningly. "Elizabeth," she offered. "Elizabeth Colter." "Elizabeth," he pronounced carefully, then shook his head slightly. Too many sounds. Despite everything, she felt a smile tug at her lips, the first in months. "My husband called me Lizzie." "Lizzie," he repeated, the name sounding strange, but not unpleasant in his deep voice. He looked at her shelter, the poor arrangement of branches and her single blanket, and frowned. "Bad," he said simply. "Rain come. Need better." Without asking permission, he began gathering larger branches from along the riverbank. Elizabeth watched, wary but curious, as he efficiently constructed a far more substantial lean-to against the rock face. He worked with practiced ease, weaving smaller branches for stability. "Help," he instructed, gesturing for her to hold certain pieces in place. Working together, though mostly following his lead, they completed a shelter twice the size of her original attempt in less than an hour. Inside, it was large enough to sit upright comfortably. When finished, Nóġì gathered dried grasses for a sleeping mat, gesturing for her to test it. Elizabeth lowered herself onto the surprisingly comfortable surface. "Rest," he said. "I come tomorrow. Bring food." Before she could respond, he was moving away, blending into the landscape with unnerving ease. Elizabeth fingered the small medicine pouch he had left beside her. Inside were more of the herbs he'd given her, plus others she didn't recognize. An extraordinary gift from a supposed enemy. As the herbs took effect, easing her hunger pangs and bringing clarity to her foggy mind, Elizabeth wondered what sort of Apache learned English. offered help to white settlers, and called himself I. Listen, true to his word, Nóġį returned at dawn. Elizabeth woke to the gentle sound of movement outside her shelter, hand instinctively grasping Thomas's hunting knife. The blade gleamed in the early light, 12 inches of well-honed steel, the staghorn handle worn smooth from years of use. Lizzie. Nóġį's voice came soft as the river's murmur. Food. She emerged cautiously from the shelter, the knife still in hand but lowered now. He noticed it, of course. His eyes missed nothing but made no comment. Instead, he gestured to a small fire he had built, where something was cooking in a clay pot. Rabbit, he explained, stirring the contents. Wild onion, good medicine. Elizabeth inhaled the savory aroma, her stomach clenching painfully in response. When he offered her a portion in a hollowed gourd, she ate without hesitation, the rich broth warming her from within. You speak English well, she observed between careful sips. Nóġį nodded. Mission school, 2 winters, then Army Scout. His English was functional but limited, enough for basic communication but not nuance. Why did you leave the mission, she asked. His expression darkened. White God, white ways, not my people's path. He tapped his chest. Apache here, always. Elizabeth thought of the Colter family Bible, of Jacob's harsh interpretation of Scripture. I understand, she said, surprising herself with the realization that she did. They ate in silence as the sun climbed higher. Elizabeth felt strength returning to her limbs, clarity to her thoughts. The herbs Nóġì had given her yesterday had worked small wonders, easing the worst symptoms of her hunger and exposure. Why help me? She asked again, needing to understand. Your people and mine. Not same, he interrupted, his dark eyes holding hers. You, me. He gestured to the vastness around them. Land same for all. He pointed to his ear, then to his heart, repeating the gesture she'd seen yesterday. I listen. Here. Then he touched his ear and pointed to her. You speak. Here. He touched his heart again. The profound simplicity of his explanation left her momentarily speechless. Your husband, he asked, gesturing to her locket. Dead, Elizabeth replied, the word still sharp despite months of use. Fever. Nóġì nodded solemnly. My wife, my son. White man spotted sickness. I'm sorry, she offered, the words inadequate but sincere. He acknowledged her sympathy with a slight inclination of his head, then rose and began gathering wood. Elizabeth watched him for a moment, then tucked the knife into her belt and joined him. Show me, she said, what to look for. Over the next hours, Nóġì taught her to identify proper kindling, to arrange stones for a fire ring that would reflect heat into her shelter, to set simple snares for small game. His instruction was patient, demonstrated rather than explained, with occasional words to highlight important details. When a distant coyote howled, Elizabeth tensed. Nóġì shook his head. Far, not hungry, singing to Moon Sister. Moon Sister. He pointed upward where the faint outline of the waning moon was visible even in daylight. Coyote brother loves Moon Sister. Sings, so she remembers to return. It was the longest string of English words she'd heard from him, and Elizabeth wondered at the story behind it. Clearly something meaningful from his culture. As evening approached, Nóġì indicated he would leave again. Come tomorrow, he promised. Teach fishing. Elizabeth nodded, no longer afraid of his presence, but rather of his absence. Out here alone, he was her only connection to survival. Thank you, she said, meeting his gaze directly. For listening. Something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, perhaps, of her understanding of his name's significance. He touched his forehead in a gesture of acknowledgement, then melted into the landscape with that same uncanny grace. Elizabeth returned to her shelter, the hunting knife no longer clutched in her hand, but resting unused at her side. Trust, like the desert plants after rare rain, was taking tentative root. Days stretched into a week, and with each sunrise, Nóġì appeared like clockwork to continue Elizabeth's education in desert survival. Today he had brought a clay water jar, simple yet elegant, with geometric patterns etched into its surface. "Water stay cool," he explained, demonstrating how the porous clay allowed slight evaporation that kept the contents fresh. "You make." He gathered river clay, showing Elizabeth how to test its consistency between her fingers. She watched intently as he mixed the clay with fine sand, then moistened it to the proper texture. "Like this?" she asked, mimicking his movements. "Good hands," he nodded approvingly. Strong. Under his guidance, she molded the clay into a small jar. Her first attempt was lopsided, but Nóġĩ showed no judgment. "Fire makes strong," he said, setting her creation carefully aside to dry. Like people. The jar would take days to dry properly before firing. In the meantime, Nóġĩ unwrapped a small bundle containing a bone needle and sinew. Elizabeth reached into her own meager supplies and produced a spool of thread. "For mending," she explained, noting his interest. She held up his worn buckskin shirt sleeve, where a seam had begun to separate. "May I?" He hesitated, then removed the garment, revealing a muscled torso marked with old scars. Elizabeth focused on her task, trying not to notice how his presence suddenly felt different. With practiced stitches, she repaired the tear, her fingers working deftly. "My mother taught me," she explained as she worked, "said a woman's worth was in her useful hands." Nóġì watched her technique with interest. "Your mother, wise woman." Elizabeth hadn't thought of her mother as wise, strict, certainly, proper always. But looking back through the lens of years and distance, she reconsidered. Yes, in her way. She prepared me for a world harder than she said. "All mothers this way," Nóġì remarked. "My mother say, life give many wounds. Learn to stitch. Own heart." The simple profundity of his words caught Elizabeth by surprise. She finished her mending and returned the shirt, their fingers brushing momentarily. "Your name," she said, changing the subject. "What does it mean?" "Nóġì, he who listens," he translated, touching his ear. "To wind, to earth, to spirits. Is that common, names with meanings, among your people?" He nodded. "Names tell story, change sometimes when person changes." Elizabeth considered this. "In my world, we keep the same name always. Even women take their husband's name when they marry. Become different person? No, but..." She paused, never having questioned the custom before. "I suppose it's about belonging to a family." "Apache. Woman keep name," Nóġì said. "Never belong to man, belong to self, to people." As the afternoon waned, they shared a meal of roasted yucca root and dried venison. Elizabeth had begun to appreciate the subtle flavors of desert foods, so different from the heavy salt pork and beans of settler cooking. "Tomorrow," Nóġì said as they finished eating, "teach you plants, which heal, which poison." "Why are you doing all this?" Elizabeth asked, the question that had lingered since their first meeting. "Teaching me to survive." Nóġì was silent for a long moment, gazing toward the distant mountains. "When wife die, when son die, I walk into desert." His voice was low, measured. 3 days, no water, ready to join ancestors. Elizabeth held her breath, sensing the weight of his confession. "Old woman, find me. Not my people. Navajo." He touched the medicine pouch at his waist. "Give water, give herbs. Say, not your time, must listen more." He turned to face Elizabeth directly. "Now I listen, hear your spirit asking for life, not death." He gestured to the river, the shelter, the small jar drying in the sun. "Circle continues. I help you. Someday you help another." The simple truth of his philosophy struck Elizabeth deeply. It was so far from Jacob Colter's harsh judgment, yet somehow closer to the Christianity she'd been taught as a child. Compassion without condition. "I understand," she said softly, and for the first time since Thomas's death, she felt something beyond mere survival. Purpose. 2 weeks into their unlikely alliance, Elizabeth noticed a shift in Nóġì's demeanor. He arrived at her camp before dawn, his expression more serious than usual. "Today we go," he announced, indicating the distant mountains with a sweep of his hand. "Go where?" Elizabeth asked, instantly wary. Her growing trust in him was still tethered to this place, to the familiar bend in the river that had become her sanctuary. "Sacred place," he replied. "Water medicine stronger than river. You still weak." He gestured to her body, and Elizabeth couldn't deny the truth. Despite his care, she remained thin, her recovery slow. "How far?" "Sun crosses hands," he demonstrated, indicating about 5 hours of travel. "Return tomorrow." Elizabeth hesitated. To venture away from her camp into Apache territory, with only this man's word as protection, the risk was substantial. Yet something in his manner suggested this wasn't merely a practical suggestion, but something more significant. "You trust me," he said, "not a question but a statement. I trust you." He placed his hand over his heart. "Sacred place, not for white eyes. Special." The implication was clear. He was offering rare access to something precious to his people, an honor not lightly given. Elizabeth gathered her few essentials: the water jar they had fired together, Thomas's knife, a small bundle of food. "I'm ready." They set off as the first light painted the canyon walls gold. Nóġį set a deliberate pace, occasionally steadying her with a strong hand when the terrain grew challenging. He chose paths invisible to her eye, winding through arroyos and over rocky outcroppings that revealed breathtaking vistas. By midday, Elizabeth's legs ached with the effort. Though stronger than when Nóġì had first found her, she was not accustomed to such travel. Without complaint, he slowed their pace, finding shaded spots for brief rests. "The settlers speak of Apache raids," Elizabeth ventured during one such pause. "Taking captives, killing families." Nóġì's face remained impassive. "White men speak of Indian savages. Take land, kill children." He met her eyes directly. "Both true, both false. I don't understand. Some Apache raid. Some settlers kill, not all." He picked up a handful of pebbles, some dark, some light. "People like stones, many kinds." The simplicity of his wisdom struck her. How easily settlers lumped all native peoples together, just as the Apache likely viewed all whites as one enemy. As afternoon stretched toward evening, they entered a narrow canyon, its walls rising hundreds of feet on either side. The air grew cooler, and Elizabeth detected a subtle change in smell: moisture, minerals, something green and alive. The canyon twisted, then suddenly opened into a hidden valley, perhaps a half-mile across. At its center, a series of stepped pools descended from a rock face, water bubbling up from some subterranean source to form crystal-clear basins before continuing downward. "Sacred springs," Nóġì said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Old ones come here, before Apache, before all." Elizabeth stood transfixed. In the harsh desert landscape, this hidden oasis seemed miraculous. Lush plants surrounded the pools, birds darted among them, and the entire scene was bathed in the golden light of approaching sunset. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "Water speaks here," Nóġì said. "Listen with body, not ears." He led her to the edge of the lowest pool, indicating she should remove her boots. Elizabeth complied, then followed his example by slipping her feet into the water. The sensation was immediate, a tingling warmth that seemed to pulse up through her legs. "The water, it feels alive," she gasped. Nóġì nodded. "Earthblood, healing power. Is it permitted to enter?" she asked, suddenly conscious that this might be a sacred site with rules she didn't understand. "Water calls who it needs," he replied. "It calls you. I hear." He gestured to a natural shelf of rock beside one of the middle pools. "Rest there. Water will speak." As Elizabeth carefully made her way to the spot he indicated, she felt a profound sense of trespassing, not on Apache land, but on something far older, something that, as Nóġì suggested, preceded all human claims to this place. Elizabeth woke to the gentle rhythm of a drum. The sound seemed to pulse in harmony with the bubbling springs, creating a pattern that resonated in her chest. Nóġį sat cross-legged on a flat stone, a small hand drum resting on his knee. His eyes were closed, his expression serene as his fingers coaxed the heartbeat rhythm from the taut skin. She had slept deeply beside the middle pool, more soundly than any night since Thomas's death. The mineral-rich water had left her skin. Feeling supple, the constant ache in her joints noticeably diminished. When Nóġì opened his eyes and saw her watching, he nodded in greeting but continued the gentle drumming. After several minutes, he began to hum, a melody that rose and fell like the canyon winds. Then, softly at first, he began to sing in his native tongue. The words were incomprehensible to Elizabeth, but their emotional impact transcended language. There was longing in the cadence, reverence in the tone, a connection to something ancient and enduring. When the song ended, the silence felt charged with meaning. "Medicine song," Nóġì explained, offering her the drum. It was smaller than she'd expected, perhaps 8 inches across, the hide stretched over a circular wooden frame and secured with sinew. Geometric patterns had been painted around its edge in faded earth tones. "My grandmother's," he said, "4 generations of healers." Elizabeth accepted the drum with appropriate reverence. "I don't know how to play it." "Heart knows," he replied, placing her hand on the drumhead. "Listen first, then do." He guided her fingers, demonstrating the proper technique, not striking but pressing and releasing, allowing the natural resonance of the hide to create sound. Under his patient instruction, Elizabeth began to produce a hesitant rhythm. "Good," he encouraged. "Now close eyes, feel water, feel air, let hands follow." Elizabeth complied, trying to silence her self-consciousness. Gradually her fingers found a natural pattern, mimicking the pulse of the springs. "Song now," Nóġì said. "Your song." "I don't know any Apache songs," she protested. "Not Apache song. Your song, from here." He touched her chest lightly. Elizabeth thought of the hymns from her childhood church, the folk songs her mother had taught her, the lullabies she had once imagined singing to children of her own. What emerged, however, was something different, a wordless melody that seemed to rise from some untapped source within her. It was imperfect, wavering at times, but Nóġì's expression told her it was right. When she finally fell silent, the canyon seemed to hold the echo of her voice. "The water listens," he said, "remembers your voice now." "What was your song about?" she asked. "The one you sang, asking ancestors for wisdom, thanking water spirits for healing." He gazed at the bubbling source, telling of 2-legged ones who walk different paths but seek same mountain. Elizabeth understood he was referring to them, an Apache man and a white woman, divided by everything the outside world recognized, yet connected by something more fundamental. "In my church," she said hesitantly, "we sing hymns of praise and supplication. Some are very beautiful." She hummed a few bars of Amazing Grace, the melody haunting in the canyon's natural acoustics. Nóġì listened intently. "Good medicine. Song," he pronounced when she finished. "Strong spirit. It speaks of being lost, then found," Elizabeth translated, "of blindness giving way to sight." "Same mountain," Nóġì nodded. "Different path." As morning warmed the hidden valley, they shared a simple meal of pine nuts, dried berries, and spring water. Elizabeth felt strength flowing back into her body, not just from the food and water, but from something less tangible. Purpose, perhaps, or hope. "We stay one more night," Nóġì decided. "Water has more to give you." "What about your people? Won't they wonder where you are?" A shadow crossed his features. "I tell when needed, some things more important than rules." Elizabeth sensed complexity behind his words. His position among his people, the risks he took in bringing her. Here, the delicate balance he maintained between worlds. "Thank you," she said simply, "for sharing this place with me." His response was equally simple. "Water called you. I only listened." On their second night at the springs, beneath a sky blazing with stars undimmed by city lights, Nóġį removed a necklace from around his neck. 5 bear claws strung on a leather cord, interspersed with polished stones and bone beads. He held it in his palm, the firelight gleaming on its worn surfaces. "Father's father's father made this," he said, his voice low. "Great warrior, fought Mexican soldiers, fought bluecoats." His finger traced one particularly deep scratch on a claw. "Each mark, one battle." Elizabeth leaned closer to examine the artifact. "It's remarkable. Why do you wear it? Are you also a warrior?" Nóġį's expression grew distant. "All Apache men warriors. Must be, but—" he touched his chest. "Not all have warrior heart." "You prefer peace," she suggested. "Prefer life," he corrected. "Fighting brings death to both sides. No winners." He returned the necklace to its place around his neck, the bear claws resting against his skin like a constant reminder. "My father died fighting bluecoats. 19 summers ago. I was—" He held up both hands, fingers spread. 10 years old, Elizabeth calculated. He nodded. "Mother say, now you man of family. Give me this." He touched the necklace again. Heavy, burden for small shoulders. Elizabeth thought of her own childhood in Pennsylvania, sheltered and secure. At 10, she had been learning piano and French, her greatest worry whether her ribbons matched her dress. The contrast was stark. After father died, Apache ways changing, Nóġì continued. Some fight harder, some seek new path. My uncle, wise man, medicine man, say, learn white man ways, not to become white man, to protect our people. So you went to the mission school, Elizabeth said, piecing together his story. 2 winters. Learn English, learn writing, learn white man's God. His mouth tightened. Also learn white man's lies. Treaties made, treaties broken. He stared into the flames. When school finished, bluecoat captain offer scout job. Say, help us track hostile Indians. I say, these are my people. He say, some Apache help white settlers. Some Apache raid, kill. You choose which side. An impossible choice, Elizabeth murmured. Chose middle path. Dangerous path. His eyes reflected the fire's glow. Scout for bluecoats when they hunt raiders who harm innocent people, not when they take more land, break more promises. Elizabeth considered his precarious position, trusted fully by neither side, walking a tightrope between worlds. That can't be easy. Easy path, often wrong path, he replied with a shrug. Then, after a moment of silence, what of your story, before husband died? Elizabeth hadn't expected the question. Few people had ever asked about her life, assuming it began and ended with her role as Thomas Colter's wife. I grew up in Philadelphia. My father was a professor of literature. My mother came from a good family, not wealthy but respected. She smiled faintly at the memory. They wanted me to marry a doctor or lawyer, someone established, not frontierman, Nóġì observed. No. They were horrified when I fell in love with Thomas. He was passing through delivering furs from the West, rough-spoken, wild by their standards, but he had read Milton and Shakespeare, could quote poetry while skinning a rabbit. The memory brought an unexpected warmth. He promised to show me a world bigger than drawing rooms and garden parties. And he did. You not regret? Even now, Elizabeth considered the question carefully. I regret his death. I regret being cast aside by people who claim to be family. But no, I don't regret Thomas, or coming west. She gestured to the springs, the star-filled sky. I would never have seen this. Nóġì nodded, understanding in his eyes. Loss. Changes path, not journey. What about your wife? Elizabeth ventured carefully. You said the spotted sickness. Pain flickered across his features, but he did not turn away from the question. Ayana, strong woman, healer like grandmother. Our son, Tarak, had 5 summers when sickness came to village. His hands clenched. White trader brought blankets. Gift, he said. Didn't know sickness lived in them. The silence that followed was filled with unspoken grief. Elizabeth reached out impulsively, covering his hand with hers. He didn't pull away. They left the sacred springs at dawn, Elizabeth's body stronger, her spirit renewed. The journey back seemed shorter somehow, as if the land itself had contracted to ease their passage. By mid-afternoon, the familiar bend in the river came into view, but something was wrong. Nóġì froze, raising one hand in warning. Elizabeth followed his gaze to her camp. The shelter had been disturbed, branches broken and scattered. Nearby, partially buried in the sand, lay a broken wagon wheel. Someone was here, she whispered, fear tightening her chest. Nóġì crouched, examining the ground with expert eyes. 3 men, 2 days ago. He pointed to barely visible impressions in the sandy soil. Heavy boots, white men. Settlers? Why would they... Searching, he interrupted, indicating how the footprints circled her camp methodically. Looking for something or someone. A cold dread settled in Elizabeth's stomach. Jacob, Nóġì looked at her questioningly. My brother-in-law. He must have followed my trail. She hugged herself against a sudden chill. But why now? After all this time? Nóġì continued examining the site, moving outward in concentric circles. Near the water's edge, he stooped to retrieve something half buried in the mud, a broken harness strap with a distinctive brass buckle. Know this? He asked, holding it up. Elizabeth took it, turning the muddy leather in her hands. Yes, it's from Jacob's team, the matched greys. Her fingers traced the ornate C stamped into the brass. Colter. Nóġì scanned the horizon, his posture tense. Not safe here now. They return. How can you be sure? He pointed to her scattered belongings, then to a crude message scratched into the trunk of a nearby cottonwood. Found you. Elizabeth felt her knees weaken. Why? Why would he track me down like this? He was the one who cast me out. Nóġì helped her to a sitting position on a flat rock. Things taken? Missing? Elizabeth surveyed what remained of her camp. Most items seemed accounted for, though, in disarray. Then she remembered. The Bible, the family Bible Jacob threw at me when he drove me out. She searched frantically through her scattered possessions. It's gone. Important, sacred writing? Yes, but... Elizabeth hesitated. There was something else, something inside it. Papers, legal papers Thomas had me keep there for safekeeping. Nóġì watched her intently. What papers? A deed. For land. Thomas staked a claim before we were married. Land with water rights. She looked up at him, understanding dawning. Valuable land. Where? This land? Elizabeth shook her head. North of here, near the mountains. Thomas said it had good water, good soil. He planned to build us a proper home there someday. Her voice caught. After he died, I forgot about it. It seemed meaningless without him. Nóġì absorbed this information, his expression grave. Man who throws away sister, then hunts her like deer, wants something badly, but why wait so long? It's been months. Maybe not no value before, maybe someone tell him. Nóġì helped her gather what remained of her belongings. We go, now. Not safe. Go where? My people's winter camp. 3 days west. Seeing her hesitation, he added, no choice. Lizzie, men who leave this, he gestured to the threatening message carved into the tree, not bring gifts when return. Elizabeth knew he was right. Jacob had never been violent toward her, but there had always been a coldness in him, a calculating edge that made Thomas uneasy. If he believed she stood between him and valuable property, the deed is worthless without me, she realized aloud. Thomas put it in both our names. Jacob would need my signature or proof of my death. Nóġì nodded grimly. Now you understand danger. As they hurriedly packed her few salvageable possessions, Elizabeth noticed Nóġì had become unusually quiet, his movements precise, alert. You're risking much, she said softly, taking a white woman to your people's camp. He paused, meeting her eyes directly. You risk same. Trusting Apache man settlers called savage, the truth hung between them, how far they had both journeyed from the safety of assumption and prejudice. "I trust you," Elizabeth said simply. Nóġį touched the bear-claw necklace. Briefly, then gestured toward the western horizon. "We travel until dark. Leave no trail." As they slipped away from the river camp that had been her refuge, Elizabeth glanced back once. The broken wagon wheel protruded from the sand like a grave marker, a symbol of something ending and something else beginning. They traveled until the stars emerged, following game trails and dry washes to leave minimal trace of their passage. Nóġì moved with the heightened alertness of a hunted animal, stopping often to listen and scan their back trail. Elizabeth matched his silence, understanding without words the gravity of their situation. When they finally made camp in a sheltered hollow, Nóġì permitted only the smallest of fires, shielded by rocks to contain its light. As Elizabeth huddled close to the meager warmth, he produced dried meat and a handful of parched corn from his pouch. "Eat," he urged. "Tomorrow, hard travel." Elizabeth accepted the food gratefully. As they ate, she struggled to reconcile the events of the day with the peaceful interlude at the springs, how quickly security could dissolve into danger. "I need to understand what we're facing," she said quietly. "The land Thomas claimed, I remember little about it, only that he was excited by its possibilities." Nóġì chewed thoughtfully. "What papers say? Remember words?" Elizabeth closed her eyes, trying to recall the document she'd glanced at only briefly after Thomas's death. It described boundaries, using landmarks, a lightning-struck oak, a distinctive rock formation shaped like a bear, a creek that runs year-round. Nóġì straightened. "Bear Rock? Near Talking Water Creek?" "Yes, that sounds right. You know the place?" His expression grew somber. "Sacred land to my people, old burial ground nearby. Medicine plants grow there found nowhere else." He looked away. "Many battles fought to protect it from Mexican ranchers. Then American settlers came. My father died defending that place." Elizabeth felt the blood drain from her face. Thomas claimed Apache sacred land. He couldn't have known. "Government men don't ask whose land they give away," Nóġì said without rancor, simply stating a fact. "Draw lines on paper, say, now yours. Never ask who already lives there, who buried their fathers there." The implications hit Elizabeth like a physical blow. The deed tucked innocently into her Bible, the document Jacob was now pursuing, laid. Claimed to land that rightfully belonged to Nóġì's people, land they had fought and died to protect. "I had no idea," she whispered. "Thomas never said, maybe not no," Nóġì suggested, though his tone held doubt. "Maybe government. Men not tell him." Elizabeth wasn't sure which possibility was worse, that Thomas had knowingly claimed sacred land, or that the government so casually dispensed what wasn't theirs to give. Either way, the deed represented a profound injustice. "The land is yours. Your people's," she said firmly. "If I recover the deed, I'll destroy it." Nóġì studied her face, searching for sincerity. "Land worth much, Golden Creek, good water." "Gold." Elizabeth blinked in surprise. "Thomas never mentioned." "Why brother hunt so hard?" Nóġì explained. "Someone tell him. Gold. Worth killing for to some men." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. "Jacob must have found out somehow. That's why he's so determined to find me." A chill ran through her that had nothing to do with the desert night. "Without me or proof of my death, he can't claim the land." Nóġì nodded grimly. "Now we both hunted. You for paper, me for helping you. I've put you in danger." Elizabeth realized with horror. "If Jacob finds you with me—" "My choice," he interrupted firmly. "Always my choice." They sat in silence as the fire dwindled to embers. The enormity of their situation settled around them like a heavy blanket. A white widow and an Apache scout, bound together by circumstances neither could have imagined, pursued for land that represented entirely different things to different people. "What will your people think?" Elizabeth asked finally, "when you bring a white woman to them, a woman whose husband claimed your sacred land?" Nóġì poked the embers with a stick, watching sparks rise toward the star-filled sky. Some will want you gone. Some will understand. He looked at her directly. I will speak for you. Tell how you offer to destroy paper, how you honor our ways. And if they don't accept me? He touched the bear claw necklace, a gesture she now recognized as invoking ancestral strength. Then we find another path. Together. The simple declaration, spoken without drama or hesitation, filled Elizabeth with a warmth that defied the cold desert night. Dawn broke with muted colors, the horizon smudged by dust clouds that warned of approaching riders. From their vantage point on a rocky outcrop, Nóġì pointed to tiny figures in the distance, following the river toward Elizabeth's abandoned camp. "Jacob," she whispered, recognizing even at this distance the distinctive silhouette of her brother-in-law atop his large bay horse. With him rode 4 men, rifles clearly visible across their saddles. 5 hunters, Nóġì observed grimly, professional trackers with them. See how they study ground. They watched as the men reached the camp, dismounting to search the area thoroughly. One pointed in their direction, gesturing broadly across the western landscape. "They know we went west," Elizabeth said, anxiety tightening her chest. "No direction, not exact path." Nóġì pulled a folded piece of deerskin from his pouch. On it, drawn with charcoal and earth pigments, was a detailed map of the territory. "We here," he indicated their position. "Winter camp here." He pointed to a location near a series of small mountains. Elizabeth studied the map, noting how it differed from the printed maps she'd seen. This one showed subtle features. Game trails, seasonal springs, rock formations useful for navigation, details no government surveyor would record. "Jacob will expect us to take the most direct route," she reasoned, following the main trails toward the mountains. Nóġì nodded approvingly at her analysis. "So we go another way, harder path, through Shadow Canyon, not good for horses. Will it be safe? Safe from men, not safe from land." He traced a narrow passage between cliff walls. "Flash floods. If rain comes, rock falls, mountain lions." His finger moved to a small circle marked with symbols. "Stop here first. Need supplies. Friend's place." As they prepared to move out, Elizabeth tied her hair back tightly and smudged her face with dirt at Nóġì's suggestion. From a distance, she might be mistaken for a young Apache man rather than a white woman. "Wear this," Nóġì said, offering her his spare buckskin shirt to wear over her dress. "Smell different. Dogs' tracks smell." Elizabeth hadn't considered that Jacob might use dogs. The thought sent a fresh wave of fear through her. How will we outrun them if they pick up our scent? Not outrun, outsmart. Nóġì showed her a small pouch of pungent herbs. Medicine plants, confused dog nose. They descended from their lookout and set a grueling pace across the rugged terrain. Nóġì periodically doubled back, laying false trails before obscuring their actual path with the aromatic herbs. By midday, they reached a narrow canyon entrance, barely wide enough for a person to pass sideways. "Shadow Canyon," Nóġì announced. "No horses follow here." The passage twisted between towering walls of red sandstone, so narrow in places that Elizabeth had to remove her pack and push it ahead of her. The ground showed signs of recent water flow, though now dry. "If it rains anywhere in high country, water comes here," Nóġì warned. "Must move quick, listen for sound of water." The knowledge that they were being hunted like animals kept exhaustion at bay. Elizabeth pushed her body beyond what she'd thought possible, drawing on reserves of strength she hadn't known she possessed. Late afternoon found them emerging from the canyon into a small, hidden valley, where a crude stone hut stood beside a modest spring. "Smoke curled from a hole in the roof. Tohono friend," Nóġì explained. "Old man, lives alone, trades with all tribes, even some white men. Good medicine maker." Before they could approach, the hut's door opened. An ancient man emerged, leaning on a gnarled walking stick. His face was deeply lined, his single visible eye milky with cataracts. The other was covered by a patch made from a tortoise shell. "Nóġì!" the old man called in a surprisingly strong voice. "The eagles told me you were coming." His head turned unerringly toward Elizabeth, despite his apparent blindness. "They did not mention you would bring a white woman who carries death on her trail." Nóġì stepped forward respectfully. "Wise one, she is hunted unjustly. We seek refuge and supplies for the journey to my people's winter camp." The old man thumped his stick against the ground. "I see more than most with two good eyes. Come inside, both of you. There is much to discuss." He fixed his milky gaze on Elizabeth. "Including what to do about the valuable paper you seek, the one that claims land that cannot be owned." Elizabeth exchanged a startled glance with Nóġì. How could this blind old man possibly know about the deed? The old man's hut smelled of sage, tobacco, and unfamiliar herbs. Its single room was sparsely furnished, but meticulously organized. Bundles of dried plants hanging from the ceiling, clay pots arranged by size, weapons and tools placed with precision. "I am Nóġì," the elder said, gesturing for them to sit. "On woven mats near the central fire pit. The eagles speak to me, the wind carries voices, the stones remember everything." He moved with surprising agility for his age, preparing a bitter tea which he insisted they drink. "For strength," he explained, "and to hide your scent from those who hunt you." Elizabeth sipped the astringent liquid, forcing herself not to grimace. "How do you know about the deed? About the men pursuing us?" Nóġì's weathered face creased in what might have been a smile. "3 nights ago a dream came. I saw a paper burning. I saw gold in the creek turning to blood. I saw you, white woman, standing between worlds." He turned to Nóġì. "You bring trouble to your people, he who listens. I bring truth." Nóġì countered respectfully. "This woman would destroy the paper that claims our sacred land. Intentions circle like hawks, actions strike like eagles." Nóġì stirred the fire with his stick. "The men who hunt you crossed Shadow Canyon's entrance at sunset. They argue now whether to follow. The one with hatred in his heart insists they must." The thought of Jacob pursuing them through that treacherous passage sent a chill through Elizabeth. "They'll be upon us by morning." Perhaps. Perhaps not. The old man reached for a pouch beside him. "The sky speaks of rain in the high country tonight." Nóġì and Nóġì exchanged meaningful glances. Flash floods in the canyon would make it impassable, potentially deadly for anyone caught inside. "We should warn them," Elizabeth said instinctively. Nóġì's milky eye seemed to peer directly into her soul. "You would save the man who hunts you like prey?" "He's still family," she replied, though the word felt hollow. "And those with him may not understand what they're part of." The elder nodded slowly. "Compassion for enemies. Rare medicine." He handed Nóġì a small leather bundle. "Take this to Mourning Dove. Tell her Nóġì says to welcome the white woman who carries 2 hearts." From a niche in the wall, he retrieved a larger bundle wrapped in rabbit fur. Medicine plants, healing stones, protection songs. He placed it in Elizabeth's hands. A gift from one who walks between worlds to another. Elizabeth felt the weight of the bundle, physically light but symbolically heavy. "I don't deserve such generosity." "Deserve?" Nóġì chuckled. "The rain doesn't ask if the ground deserves water, it simply gives." While Nóġì and the elder discussed roots and tribal politics in their native tongue, Elizabeth examined the medicine bundle. Inside were small pouches of herbs, polished stones of various colors, a bone needle, sinew thread, and what appeared to be a tiny doll fashioned from corn husks and feathers. "Protection," Nóġì explained, noticing her curiosity. "Made by our most powerful medicine woman, keeps evil spirits at distance. Your tribe and Nóġì's, your friends, all desert people connected," he replied. like fingers on hand, different but part of same body. As night deepened, the old man insisted they rest in his hut while he consulted the stars. Despite her exhaustion, Elizabeth found sleep elusive, her mind racing with questions about the mysterious elder and his knowledge. Near dawn, Nóġį returned, his single eye gleaming in the faint firelight. "The waters came in Shadow Canyon. Those who pursued you have turned back, all but one." "Jacob," Elizabeth whispered. "A man consumed by greed sees no danger," the elder confirmed. "He follows another path now, longer, but he knows where you go." He fixed his gaze on Nóġì. "You must reach your people before he finds friends at the fort." They departed as first light painted the eastern sky, provisioned with food, water, and Nóġį's mysterious medicines. The old man stood in his doorway, leaning on his stick. "Remember," he called after them, "the paper is nothing. The land remains. What matters is what grows from this journey." He raised his walking stick in benediction. "May you find the path between worlds." As they crested a ridge, and the hut disappeared from view, Elizabeth touched the medicine bundle now secured at her waist. "Do you think his vision was true? About the deed burning?" Nóġì's expression was solemn. "Nóġì sees with spirit eyes. Different sight, not always clear meaning, but you believe him." It wasn't a question, but Nóġì answered anyway. "I believe journey more important than destination." 2 days of hard travel brought them to the outskirts of the Apache winter camp. From their position on a juniper-covered ridge, Elizabeth could see smoke from cooking fires rising between carefully arranged wickiups. Women moved about carrying water or working with hides. Children played games in the central clearing, and warriors stood sentinel at strategic points. "You're home," she said softly. Nóġì nodded, his expression a complex mixture of belonging and uncertainty. "Wait here," he instructed. "Must speak to elders first. Prepare them." Elizabeth understood. A white woman's unexpected arrival required diplomatic handling. "I'll be here." As Nóġì descended toward the camp, Elizabeth settled behind a rock formation that provided both shelter and concealment. From her pack, she removed the old rifle Thomas had taught her to shoot, a Sharp's carbine, worn but reliable. She'd never fired it at anything but targets and small game, had in fact almost forgotten its existence until Nóġì had reminded her of its importance. "The weapon that took lives can save them," the old man had said cryptically, directing them to where she'd left it wrapped in oilcloth and buried beneath a distinctive rock formation months earlier. Elizabeth checked the action and ammunition with the methodical care Thomas had instilled in her. 5 cartridges remained. Not many, if it came to a confrontation. She prayed it wouldn't. The winter sun was beginning its descent when she spotted movement in the brush below, not Nóġì returning from the camp, but a figure approaching from the east. She raised the rifle's sight to her eye, her breath, in catching when she recognized the rider, Jacob Colter, alone and determined, rifle across his saddle. He had found her. Elizabeth's hands trembled slightly as she sighted down the barrel. She could end this now. One shot from this distance and her brother-in-law would never threaten her again. Thomas's voice seemed to whisper in her memory, "Squeeze, don't pull. Breathe out slow as you fire." But could she shoot a man in cold? Blood? Even Jacob? While she wrestled with her conscience, Jacob dismounted and secured his horse to a scrub pine. He removed his hat, wiped sweat from his brow, and scanned the ridgeline methodically. His gaze passed over her position without pausing. Her concealment still held. From her vantage point, she watched him check his rifle, then begin a cautious ascent toward her hiding place. How had he found her so precisely? Had he been tracking them all along, just out of sight? Elizabeth's finger rested lightly on the trigger as she considered her options. She could wait for Nóġì to return with help from the camp. She could attempt to slip away undetected, or she could confront Jacob directly. The decision was made for her when a loose stone shifted beneath her boot, tumbling down the slope. With a telltale clatter, Jacob's head snapped up, his rifle instantly raised. "Elizabeth," he called, his voice carrying clearly in the still afternoon air. "I know you're up there. Show yourself." She remained motionless, the rifle steady in her hands. "I'm alone," Jacob continued. "I just want to talk about the land, about what's rightfully yours and mine." So that was his approach, reasonableness, appeals to family obligation. Elizabeth almost laughed at the transparency of it. "5 minutes," he called. "That's all I ask. Then if you still want me gone, I'll leave." It was a lie. Elizabeth knew it with bone-deep certainty. Jacob had not tracked her for days, across dangerous terrain alone, just to talk and then quietly depart. She shifted position slightly to maintain her aim. "Stop where you are, Jacob," she called, her voice stronger than she'd expected. "Come no closer." He froze, eyes searching for her. "Elizabeth, thank God you're alive. I've been worried sick." "Lower your rifle," she commanded. "Place it on the ground." "Now, Elizabeth, that's hardly necessary between family. We stopped being family when you crossed out my name in the Bible and threw me out to die." Her voice remained steady, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "The rifle, Jacob, down, now." For a moment, he seemed to consider rushing her position. Then, slowly, he bent and placed his rifle on the ground. "That deed is worth a fortune." "Elizabeth," he said, straightening, "the land has gold. Did you know that? Enough to make us both wealthy beyond imagining." "Us?" She nearly laughed. "There is no us, Jacob. We're still family. Thomas would have wanted—" "Don't you dare speak his name." For the first time, anger heated her voice. "Thomas knew what you were. He never trusted you." Jacob's expression hardened, the mask of familial concern slipping. "Be reasonable, Elizabeth. That land is wasted on you. You can't work it alone. You can't defend it." "It's not mine to give," she replied. "That land belongs to the Apache. It contains sacred sites, burial grounds." Jacob snorted. "Indian superstition. The government granted legal title to Thomas. Now it passes to his heirs, to you, and through marriage ties, partially to me. Is that what this is about? Your claim as Thomas's brother? I have investors waiting, men with money and influence. We'll build something magnificent, a mining operation to extract that gold. It could change the whole territory." "And the Apache?" Jacob's dismissive wave spoke volumes. "The army will handle any complications." Elizabeth felt cold clarity settle over her. This wasn't just about greed. It was about the continuation of a pattern, taking what wasn't rightfully offered, dismissing those who had prior claim, using force to silence objection. "The deed is gone," she lied, watching his reaction. "I destroyed it months ago." Rage flashed across Jacob's features. "You're lying." "Am I? Why would I keep a document claiming land that isn't rightfully mine?" "Because you're a Colter, damn it!" Jacob took a step forward. "And Colters take what's theirs." "Not one more step," Elizabeth warned, revealing her position just enough that he could see the rifle trained on him. He froze, then slowly smiled. "You won't shoot me, Elizabeth. You haven't got it in you." "Perhaps not," came Nóġĩ's voice from behind Jacob, "but I have." Jacob whirled to find Nóġĩ standing 10 paces away, bow drawn and arrow aimed at his heart. Behind him, at the edge of the clearing, stood 3 Apache warriors similarly armed. "Indian lover," Jacob spat at Elizabeth. "You'd side with savages against your own blood." "They showed me more kindness as strangers than you ever did as family," Elizabeth replied, emerging fully from her hiding place, rifle still trained on her brother-in-law. Jacob's eyes darted between threats, calculating odds. "The army patrol from Fort Hastings is less than an hour behind me," he said. "Captain Williams remembers you, Scout, remembers how you refused to help track those Apache raiders last summer." Nóġĩ's expression remained impassive, but Elizabeth saw concern flash in his eyes. If soldiers were truly coming, the situation could escalate beyond their control. "Last chance, Elizabeth," Jacob pressed. Give me the deed. Come with me, and I'll tell them you were taken against your will. No one needs to die today." Before she could respond, a pillar of smoke rose from the direction of the Apache camp, not the thin wisps of cooking fires, but a thick column signaling urgent communication. One of the warriors said something to Nóġì, who nodded grimly. "What is it?" Elizabeth asked. "Signal fire," Nóġì explained. "Riders coming from west, not soldiers." His gaze locked with hers. "Settlers. Bauer and his men," Jacob confirmed with sudden confidence. "I sent word before following you. They understand what's at stake." Elizabeth felt the situation spiraling beyond her control. Armed settlers from one direction, possibly soldiers from another, and caught between them the Apache camp with women and children. "Jacob, whatever you've set in motion, stop it now," she pleaded. "Innocent people will be hurt." "Innocent?" Jacob scoffed. "They're Apache." The casual racism in his tone solidified Elizabeth's resolve. "Nóġì," she said, without taking her eyes off Jacob. "Take me to your elders, now." "Elizabeth, don't be a fool." Jacob lunged suddenly, reaching for her rifle. The twang of a bowstring cut through the air. Jacob staggered, an arrow protruding from his shoulder. He fell to his knees, eyes wide with shock. You shot me," he gasped, looking at Nóġì with disbelief. "Warning," Nóġì replied calmly. "Next arrow finds heart." One of the warriors secured Jacob while another collected his weapon. Blood stained his shirt, but Elizabeth could see the wound wasn't fatal. A deliberate choice on Nóġì's part. "Bind him," she instructed. "We'll take him with us." As they prepared to descend to the camp, a distant sound reached them. Hoofbeats approaching fast. Time was running out. Elizabeth touched the medicine bundle at her waist, drawing strength from its presence. "Whatever happens next," she told Nóġì, "I stand with your people." The look he gave her contained a depth of emotion that needed no translation in any language. The Apache winter camp transformed into organized chaos as warriors prepared defenses and women gathered children. Elizabeth, with Nóġì translating, stood before a council of elders, 3 men and 2 women whose weathered faces bore the dignified gravity of those who had witnessed too many such confrontations. "Tell them everything," Nóġì urged. "Truth is our only weapon now." Elizabeth spoke clearly, directly, explaining about Thomas's deed, Jacob's pursuit, and the approaching threats. She didn't soften Jacob's intentions or minimize the danger. When she finished by declaring her willingness to destroy the deed and renounce any claim to the land, the eldest woman, Mourning Dove, to whom Nahimana had sent greetings, studied her with penetrating eyes. "Why should we believe a white woman's words?" she asked in halting English. White promises turned to dust in the wind. Elizabeth unbound her hair, revealing its golden color, so unlike the Apache's raven black. "I stand before you as I am, not hiding, not pretending to be what I'm not." She touched the medicine bundle at her waist. "Nahimana said I carry 2 hearts. Perhaps that's true, but both hearts know what's right." While the elders conferred in their language, Jacob sat bound and sullen nearby, his wound tended, but his anger undiminished. "They'll kill us both," he muttered to Elizabeth. "You're a fool to trust them, as you were a fool to trust me to choose gold over people," she countered. A scout rushed into the council circle, speaking rapidly in Apache. Nóġì translated, "Settlers approaching from west, soldiers from east, both groups small but armed." The eldest male elder spoke firmly, gesturing toward the ridgeline. Nóġì nodded, then turned to Elizabeth. "You must go with me, now." "Where?" "Lookout point. They must see you are here by choice, not captive." He untied Jacob and hauled him to his feet. "He comes too." They climbed quickly to a prominent outcropping visible from both approaches to the camp. Below, the Apache warriors took defensive positions, while women and children retreated to protective ravines behind the camp. From their vantage point, they could see both approaching parties, perhaps a dozen settlers led by a heavy-set man, Elizabeth. recognized as Bauer, the trading post owner, and from the east a small cavalry detail of 6 soldiers. "The deed," Nóġį said urgently. "Did you truly destroy it?" Elizabeth shook her head. "I never had it. Jacob took it when he searched my camp." Jacob's laughter confirmed her suspicion. "In my saddlebag," he taunted, "along with a letter detailing how the Apache abducted you and how I bravely tracked you to their camp." The implications were chilling. If Jacob died in the coming confrontation, that letter would condemn the entire Apache band. If Elizabeth died, the deed would pass entirely to Jacob as Thomas's brother. The cavalry drew closer, close enough that Elizabeth could make out the captain's features beneath his wide-brimmed hat. Behind her, Nóġį stood silent, calculating, options that seemed increasingly limited. "There's still a way to end this peacefully," she said suddenly. From around her neck she removed the silver locket containing Thomas's portrait. Opening it, she extracted a folded paper tucked behind the daguerreotype, yellowed and creased, but intact. "What is that?" Jacob demanded. "Insurance," Elizabeth replied. "Thomas never fully trusted you. Before he died, he signed this, a statement, conveying his land claim entirely to me, with instructions that if I died under suspicious circumstances, the land would be donated to the territorial government for a reservation." Jacob's face contorted. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" She held the paper where he could see Thomas's distinctive signature. "The army captain can verify it, as can Judge Reinhardt in Fort Hastings, who witnessed it." Whether her gambit would work remained uncertain. The document was genuine. Thomas had indeed signed it, though more as protection against general misfortune than against Jacob specifically. But it represented legitimacy, official standing, a voice in the white man's world of papers and legalities. "What do you want?" Jacob asked, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Peace," Elizabeth said simply, "and justice." As the soldiers drew within hailing distance, Nóġì placed something in Elizabeth's palm. 2 feathers bound together with red thread. One was from an eagle, representing strength, the other from a dove, symbolizing peace. 2 hearts, he said softly. 2 paths, 1 journey. Elizabeth closed her fingers around the feathers, drawing strength from their meaning. Whatever came next, she would face it standing between worlds, not torn apart by them, but bridging them. Captain Williams reined his horse to a halt at the base of the outcropping, his weathered face registering surprise at the tableau before him. A white woman standing beside an Apache scout with an injured white man under guard. "Mrs. Colter," he called up, "are you being held against your will?" Before Elizabeth could respond, Bauer and his settlers arrived from the opposite direction, rifles raised and expressions hostile. "There she is," Bauer shouted. "And that Apache, who's been helping her. Jacob was right." Elizabeth raised her hands for silence. "I am Elizabeth Colter, widow of Thomas Colter," she proclaimed, her voice carrying clearly in the tense stillness. "I am here by my own choice, under no duress. The Apache have shown me only kindness." Captain Williams studied her carefully. "Jacob Colter reported you were taken captive." "My brother-in-law's concern is touching," Elizabeth replied with pointed irony, "considering he cast me out of my home after Thomas died, leaving me to perish in the wilderness." Murmurs rose from the soldiers. Several had known Thomas and respected him. "She's been bewitched by the savage," Jacob called out desperately. "Look at her, dressed in Indian clothes, speaking their filth. Is that an arrow wound in your shoulder?" "Mr. Colter?" Captain Williams inquired mildly. "They shot me when I tried to rescue her." Nóġì stepped forward. "Captain Williams," he said formally, "you know me. 3 summers as scout for army. I not lie to you." The captain nodded. "You've always been honorable, Nóġì, unlike some scouts I could name." His gaze swept meaningfully over the assembled settlers, several of whom had worked as trackers for the army. "This about land," Nóġì continued. "Sacred land, Golden Creek." "Gold," The captain's eyebrows rose. That does tend to complicate matters. Elizabeth descended carefully from the outcropping, the document from her locket held visibly in her hand. Jacob lunged toward her, but was restrained by two Apache warriors. "Captain, I have Thomas's deed to the land in question, along with his signed statement regarding its disposition." She handed him both papers. "You'll see everything is in order." Williams reviewed the documents, his expression giving nothing away. "These appear legitimate," he acknowledged. "The deed is properly filed with the territorial office. The second document bears Judge Reinhardt's seal. The land is legally mine," Elizabeth stated, "and I have decided what to do with it." Bauer pushed forward. "Now see here, woman. Jacob promised us shares in the mining operation. We've already invested." "My brother-in-law had no authority to make such promises," Elizabeth cut him off, "and as you can see from that document, I alone determine the land's fate." The captain handed the papers back to Elizabeth. "What exactly do you intend, Mrs. Colter?" Elizabeth looked at Nóġį, drawing strength from his steady presence. "The land contains sites sacred to the Apache people. I intend to return it to their stewardship." Outrage erupted from the settlers. "You can't give American land to Indians," Bauer shouted. "It's treason." "Actually," Captain Williams interjected, "as the legal owner, Mrs. Colter can indeed deed her property to whomever she chooses. There's precedent for private land being transferred to tribal care, though it's uncommon." Jacob's face had gone from red to purple. "This is madness. She's throwing away a fortune." "No," Elizabeth replied. "I'm honoring what truly has value." She turned to Mourning Dove, who had joined them, and offered both documents. "These papers mean nothing compared to your people's ancient claim to this land. But in the white man's world, they have power. I give them to you to protect your sacred places." The elderly woman accepted the papers with grave dignity. "Two hearts," she said, echoing Nahimana's words. "You see with clear eyes, Elizabeth Colter." From within her deerskin pouch, Mourning Dove withdrew a blanket, small enough to hold in both hands, yet intricately woven with symbols that combined Apache patterns with motifs Elizabeth recognized from settler quilts. "Marriage blanket," Mourning Dove explained, "for two who walk between worlds." Elizabeth looked at Nóġì in stunned question. His eyes held both uncertainty and hope. "My grandson has chosen," Mourning Dove continued. "If you choose same path ceremony at dawn." The implications struck Elizabeth like a physical wave. Marriage to Nóġì, a life neither fully in one world nor the other, but somehow in both. Captain Williams cleared his throat. "Well, this has taken an unexpected turn." He gestured to his men to take custody of Jacob. "Mr. Colter, you'll be returning with us to Fort Hastings to answer some questions about false reports and apparent claim jumping." As Jacob was led away, spitting curses, Elizabeth stood at a crossroads more significant than any physical junction of trails. In her hand, Mourning Dove's marriage blanket represented a future she had never imagined possible. "Your answer," Nóġì asked softly, the question holding all the complexity of their unlikely journey together. Spring painted the desert in subtle hues, the pale yellow of brittlebush flowers, the fiery red of Indian paintbrush, the delicate lavender of desert lupine. At the confluence of two streams, where sacred waters met, Elizabeth and Nóġì had built their home. Not quite a settler's cabin, not quite an Apache wickiup, the structure embodied their shared vision. Stone foundation supporting walls, of woven branches plastered with adobe, windows facing the cardinal directions, a central fire pit surrounded by both native rugs and a hand-carved rocking chair. Elizabeth knelt in the garden they had established, carefully transplanting seedlings. Some from cultivated settler stock, others native plants with medicinal properties that Mourning Dove had taught her to nurture. The soil here was surprisingly rich, fed by the year-round waters that made this place so valuable to both peoples. Nearby, Two eagles circled lazily in the thermals, their sharp eyes perhaps noticing what human perspective missed. How this small homestead formed a perfect center point between the Apache winter grounds to the west and the small, recently established trading settlement to the east. Nóġį emerged from the tree line carrying freshly cut saplings for the arbor they were building. 3 months had passed since their ceremony at dawn, a blending of traditions that had raised eyebrows among both communities, but had been witnessed with genuine goodwill by those with open hearts. Captain Williams had stood witness for the territorial government, his presence ensuring that both the marriage and Elizabeth's land transfer to the Apache received official recognition. The agreement they had crafted together established the sacred sites as protected ground while allowing for carefully managed coexistence. Hunting rights preserved, water access shared, gold extraction forbidden. The plants grow strong, Nóġì observed, setting down his burden to examine a particularly robust sage seedling. Like us, Elizabeth replied with a smile, rising to brush soil from her skirts. A practical garment she had designed. Combining the comfortable cut of Apache women's clothing with settler fabrics, they worked together in companionable silence, planting the saplings in a circular pattern that would eventually provide shade for gatherings. Some days they spoke little, communicating through glances and gestures that required no translation. Other days they taught each other words and stories, building bridges between their languages as they had between their worlds. It hadn't been easy. There were still those among the Apache who viewed Elizabeth with suspicion, and certainly settlers who crossed to the other side of the street when Nóġì accompanied her to the trading post. But there were also growing numbers who recognized the wisdom in their path, the possibility that neither conquest nor resistance but respectful coexistence might be the way forward. Twice monthly, Elizabeth taught reading to Apache children, whose parents wanted them to understand the white man's ways without abandoning their own. Weekly, Nóġì led hunting parties that included young settlers eager to learn sustainable practices from those who had thrived in this harsh land for generations. And quietly, almost without notice, others like them had begun to appear. A Navajo silversmith and his Mexican wife establishing a workshop at the trading post. A widowed settler woman being trained in plant medicine by a Tohono healer, a young army lieutenant who had resigned his commission to study indigenous languages. As twilight softened the landscape, Elizabeth and Nóġì sat together on the bench they had built facing the river, the same river where she had once knelt in desperate prayer, where he had watched from the shadows, where two paths had unexpectedly converged. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked softly. "Choosing this? Life between worlds?" Nóġì considered her question with characteristic thoughtfulness. "Path not easy," he acknowledged, "but right path rarely is." He took her hand, their fingers intertwining, hers fair from years of indoor life before the frontier, his darkened by generations under the desert sun. "Different yet fitted perfectly together. Two heart people needed," he continued. "Build bridges others can cross." Elizabeth leaned against his shoulder, watching the first stars appear in the deepening blue above. From the small cluster of seedlings, planted near their door, half native grasses, half cultivated grain, came the evening song of nesting birds, neither knowing nor caring about the origins of their shelter, only that it sustained life. "I think I finally understand what Nahimana meant," she said, "about the paper burning, but the land remaining." She gestured to the thriving garden, the sturdy home, the joining of streams. "This is what grows from our journey." Nóġì nodded, his arm tightening around her shoulders as the river continued its eternal flow, carrying their story forward into an unwritten future.